Good morning, everyone. Um, Thank you for inviting us and having us here again. We can have the next meeting in Jamaica, um, so we'll work on that one. In Yeah, absolutely. We can work on that. We have a meeting tomorrow, so we can talk about that one. My name is Matthew McNaughton, as was kind of shared a while ago. I'm one of the co-founders of the Slash Roots Foundation, which is a civic tech nonprofit based in Kingston, Jamaica. And what we focus on is design digital tools and services to transform the relationship between governments and the public in the Caribbean. And Code for the Caribbean is one of the initiatives under the organization. And what I'm going to be talking about today a little bit, okay, there we go, is some work that we've been doing in the space of agriculture, and particularly agriculture in the region, and looking at this problem of reflecting like, well, how do we build a more data-driven agricultural sector, and probably relevant to you guys, like why is that important? And so agriculture is interesting in that it's one of the sectors that is particularly sensitive to the flow of information between market participants. There have been tons of surveys that have shown that increased access to information services like prices or market information drastically improves the income of farmers while also decreasing the cost of food, which is particularly important given that by 2050, we actually have to double the amount of food that we produce as a species globally. But at the same time, the risk of persons that hunger is actually expected to increase from 881 million, which it is now, to over 1 billion people who are either at risk of being classified as hungry or are that. And so when we talk about this idea of open data, it really presents a unique opportunity for us to think differently about how access to information that we see and being supported and advocated for across the world can change some of the systemic issues around a sector that, I mean, most people don't think of as very sexy, and is often very closed. And so some of the work that we've been doing is looking at, well, one, how do we apply some of these ideas in the agricultural space? But then also, how do we create a sector that's more data-driven? And then within that context, you know, what does that mean for the agricultural sector? Because agriculture itself operates in a context which is predominantly rural and resource-constrained environment, and that makes the challenge of building that type of sector even more difficult. But what does that look like in practice? So in Jamaica, where I'm from, agriculture is actually quite an important sector. And it actually employs almost 19% of the population and contributes almost 10% of GDP. And so what that translates into is about 200,000 farmers across the island in a population of almost 2 million people. But the two agencies that are predominantly responsible for responding to that sector, the Jamaica Agricultural Society and the Rural Agricultural Development Authority, have about 150 extension officers that are charged with serving that community. Now, that doesn't scale. And so what you end up happening is that you have some farmers who don't see an extension officer for 2 to 4 years, some farmers who just don't see people at all, and just a community that is severely underserved in terms of that. And so what we've been doing is working with them to think differently about how they approach the services that they are creating and create a more open way to address and serve that community. And so what that has looked like is really a kind of a radical or a very different approach to designing services and kind of a broader theory of change, which I'm going to kind of explain very briefly. And so at the base, it's looking at, well, the information that exists within the sector, how do we open that up to make it more available for all of the different actors across the sector and the work that they're doing? And actually, this stuff actually, the kind of the opening up the data started in the fellowship program 2 years ago. But then moving on from that, we said to them, all right, well, looking at some of how the institutions operate, not just opening up that data because there's no formal open government policy across the government, but saying, well, for the agencies relevant, how are we working to better share information across those agencies? And we're pretty excited because now there's a formal MOU that's being drafted around data sharing across the agricultural sector within government, which in Jamaica doesn't really happen in terms of data sharing. And so we're looking at, well, how do we better have that conversation and talk about standards across different agencies who are serving the community. Beyond that, taking a different approach to the design of services. And so what we've gotten buy-in to say is for the services that are being created and the ones that exist already, to design them with data and information in mind. Because every interaction with a farmer, every service that's provided a farmer is an opportunity to both check that farmer's information, to verify that the data that already exists is actually valid, but then also to update that information. So if it's a farmer is walking into a government farm store or to an abattoir to get their meat sold, all of those are interactions to really, if data and the services that are being created are integrated, we can now improve the quality of that information. Looking forward, also reaching out to a number of the innovators in the space that exist already that are creating digital services to say to them, hey, how about you use a lot of this data that's being created, but then also contribute back to that commons. And so it's creating this idea of a digital commons of information around the agricultural sector to really overcome some of those challenges. And then just opening that space up to other people through hackathons and events to get more people to come into the space to create services around the agricultural space. And so that idea you kind of see emerging is this concept of an ecosystem where in a space that is really quite rural and dispersed, we have different service providers collaborating around the sharing of information to actually build something that's closer to a more data-driven agricultural sector. Mouse switched again. So that's kind of the quick version. Thank you very much.